welcome listeners to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. My guest on today's podcast is my longtime friend, Michael Soto. Welcome to the podcast, Michael.
Thanks for having me, Richard. It's so great to be here with you today.
Michael is a transgender man, and he's going to share his journey with you, our listeners. And it's like going out to lunch together, and Michael's on the other side of the table, and we get to hear his story as he bravely shares this. Michael has shared his story lots of times. Some of our podcast guests, it's the first time. Michael's pretty used to sharing his story. A little background on Michael. He's president and CEO of Equality Arizona and doing great work in the state of Arizona to better support everybody. He's been co-host of the All Out in the Open podcast, which has created a lot of wonderful episodes with your co-hosts, terrific Ben Chilati and Liz McDonald. And you, I think, and Claire, maybe Dalton, have been the co-hosts of that.
Yeah, that was so fun. Such a great team.
So that's a great team. Michael's in his mid-40s. His parents are converts to the church. Michael was raised in the church, not participating in the church anymore, but very respectful of the church. In his teens, or even before then, he realized he was working through long-term gender dysphoria, and the best path for him was to transition, and he's transitioned. And I don't even call you a trans man. I just call you a man, because you are. And you've been on this road for a couple decades. This isn't a new thing for you. You just didn't just do this. And so I think your story may be helpful for listeners. Michael is often, when a new temple open house happens, often the community asks community leaders to attend the open house. And Michael and a group of people have attended the Washington, D.C. open house, and more recently, the Mesa Temple Open House. And I've just thought, we're not letting in the temple. You don't have a temple recommend, but I just love that our church invited you and wanted you, knowing you're a transgender man, to be in our most sacred place and invited you. It's not like you crashed the door. They invited you to a special VIP deal. And I thought, I hope we all treat Michael the same way that VIP invitation that came asking you to attend, and the people that greeted you and gave you that kind of VIP tour. I hope that's how we treat you.
Thank you.
And all of our transgender friends, and role model that. And some of our listeners may say, well, that's not how I'm feeling being treated as a transgender person, and recognize it's choppy. And you may feel like a VIP one day and feel like on the margins the next day. And so both Michael and I recognize that. We're not here to paint a pretty picture of what it's like to be a transgender Latter-day Saint, or just a transgender person in American culture right now. We said a prayer before we started, and Michael's working on a PhD. He is not done, serving in the world. And I think that's a PhD. And tell us what your PhD is in before I botch it.
Yeah, it's in justice studies. And so I study the state of the world in terms of justice. It's something that human beings have grappled with since the beginning of human beings, of what is a just society. And in particular, I focus on what that means for LGBTQ people, as makes sense with my work.
Respect for getting a PhD. Is this your first PhD? I know you have a master's.
Yeah. I do. I have a master's of science, and this is my first PhD, and I'm excited to be in the end stretch here. So can't wait to
your 15-year-old self would look at your mid-40-year-old self, and what you've accomplished in your life is remarkable. And your personal story, your academic pursuits, what you're doing in the community, you're just a remarkable man. And I'm honored to have you on the podcast. And listeners, let's just turn over to Michael to share his story. We prayed that this would be helpful for you if you're just wanting to better. I've always loved Brene Brown's quote, people are hard to hate, close up, move in. You just want to hear about trans people. My suggestion is form your opinions by meeting with and listening to people like Michael. And if you're working through long-term gender dysphoria and trying to figure out how to manage this, maybe Michael's story will give you hope. You're up, Michael.
All right, my friend. Well, I'm so honored to get to share my story and to get to be here with you today. I agree with you that listening to people's stories is how we get to know people as human beings and not labels, right? And so, my journey really begins at the very beginning. My first awareness of being a human being at around 3 years old was that I was a boy. I told my parents that, I told everybody that would listen. Um, I was a boy, that I wanted to grow up and become Superman, and that, those are my aspirations in life. And I remember my family correcting that and saying, "Oh no, that's cute, but you're not a boy, you're a girl," and trying, kindly to kind of correct me. And that, kind of went on throughout sort of my pre-K years of me insisting that I was a boy, my family, being like, "Oh, that's adorable, you'll grow out of that." Um, but that I never grew out of it, right? It persisted. I always felt like the boy that I was. I always felt like I wasn't seen by my family or other people. Um, the name that my parents gave me at birth never felt like it was mine. I remember throughout childhood, looking in the mirror and saying that name over and over and never connecting it with my sense of self and never seeing myself in it. And so, you know, my childhood was challenging because of that. I didn't have the language to articulate other than saying that I was a boy. I grew up in the 80s and 90s and did not have the resources that young people have today in terms of knowledge and access to information about other people. Um, I don't even think I heard the word gay until I was in high school. And I definitely didn't know that trans people existed, didn't even hear the word transgender until I was in college. And so um, I struggled with trying to explain who I was and kind of settled for just realizing that there was no way to tell anyone who I actually was. And I realized pretty early on, probably around like 8, 9, 10, kind of as you're starting to get ready for puberty, and everybody around you is getting ready for that. And people are excited, adults in your life are excited for you to grow up and, grow into this next stage of life. I was not excited. I was dreading it. It felt like a horrible, scary thing in front of me that would be a further betrayal of everything that I was. Like my body sort of fighting me, or acting against me. And I just remember, everybody being people kind of getting more strict the older I got of like, okay, you can't do that anymore. You can't do this anymore, right? You can't dress that way. You can't do certain things. And so I've always been a really masculine person. I played sports, every kind of sport I could play growing up. My my parents or my mom, she bought me a Barbie dream house one Christmas, and I did not, I just girl things weren't very appealing to me, and so I remodeled the Barbie dream house. I laid tile on the ground, like on the plastic floor, and did like home improvement things to it. And I was like, okay, I'm done. I did the thing, right? Um, so like girl things were never they were never things that I enjoyed, and they're things that everybody in my life tried to push on me. Stereotypical girl things, right? Dresses, makeup, Barbies, dolls, all of those things. Um, and they just weren't things that I was interested in. I wanted to play baseball, I wanted to play football. The one time I got in trouble in elementary school, the boys, I think I was in fifth grade, the boys decided to play tackle football one recess, and that was strictly not allowed. And I decided to play with them. And I was better. I was on my team was winning, and I was better than this one boy in particular. And he got very upset with me and called me a name. And so I punched him and put him in a headlock and got in a lot of trouble because I was stronger than him and I was angry that he called me a name. And was just kind of always looking for ways to arm wrestle, play with the boys, just be who I was. And as I got older, there got to be sort of that was frowned upon more and more, right? And being a tomboy was less and less acceptable. Um, I'll never forget one conversation at my grandmother's house. Um, my family was there. We were over for some sort of holiday, I think, and all of the women were in the kitchen or in the dining room next to the kitchen, talking to each other, hanging out. My grandmother, my mom, all my aunts, some of my cousins, and all the men were in the den watching The Godfather, and I was in the den watching The Godfather with my uncles and with my boy cousins. And I remember being called into the dining room, and the women in my family were like, "Come on, we're all in here. Come hang out with us." And I was like, "I don't want to. Like, this isn't fun. I'm watching a movie. I want to go watch the movie." And they were just like, "We want to talk to you about becoming a woman and how wonderful that is." And I was like, "Oh no, thank you. I'm zero interest in that." And tried to walk away, and they kind of got upset and were like, "Hey, one day you're going to want to be a part of this. You're going to grow up to be a woman and a mother and a wife." And I looked at them and I said, "That's never going to happen, ever." I was just like, "Absolutely not." And I left the room and went back to watching The Godfather. um but the thing that it stands out to me the most throughout my childhood is that no matter how many times I told people that's not who I was, their expectations of me and my life were not what I wanted for my life or what felt good or right to me, they didn't listen. They just kind of dismissed it and were just like, "Oh, you'll grow out of that," right? And I didn't, it was very frustrating as a young person. It made me feel like no one actually knew me, and kind of uh, in jest, I refer to my childhood as my drag years because that's what it felt like. It felt like having to put on a costume, having to pretend, having to fit, certain gender roles as best I could, even though I didn't do it well and really hated it and pushed against it. Um, but it felt like assuming a fake identity and not being who I was, and that led to a lot of, I think, difficulty for my parents, especially my mom. She really loved having, she wanted a daughter, she wanted like all sorts of things, and she wanted me to share in those things with her. And she was a cheerleader and a majorette, and she was, all of these different things growing up in her life. And she wanted a daughter that would do those things and be excited about those things and want the same things that she had wanted to grow up and be a wife and a mother. And I was never any of those things. And I think it led to, some frustration, some confusion. And I think, where my mom thought she was helping, like forcing me to go to school dances and wear a dress, right? Or like do these different things. She thought she was helping me. And for me, those were really painful moments of my life that I really hated, honestly. They felt uncomfortable. They felt wrong. They felt, I don't know how to describe it other than wrong. It felt like just really bad. And I knew my mom didn't know better, and it wasn't, I don't hold that against her. I don't blame her. Um, but I think it took a long time for my parents to reconcile sort of what they had wanted for my life and their view of my childhood as this really wonderful, sort of childhood where they did their best to support me, and then seeing like those moments that they thought were good and wonderful were really painful for me, and were the opposite. And so that took a long time for us to kind of work through that and uh, I don't know, talk through it, understand each other's perspective, and not blame each other. Just realize we didn't have a vocabulary to talk about who I actually was and why, why going to school dances and wearing a dress felt so awful, or why going to church and wearing a dress felt so awful, and, why all of these things just never worked for me. Um, so yeah, so my childhood was both wonderful and really hard. I had a lot of great opportunities. My mom really raised me more than my dad. He lived in St. Louis, and I spent summers there, but spent most of my time with my mom. She did everything she could as a working single mother to take care of me, to make sure that I had every opportunity and then some. And is an incredible human being and was an amazing mother. And it was really hard for her to come to terms with me coming out. When I came out to both my mother and my father, so I was about 19 when I came out. Um, I went to ASU for college because I got a full ride and it paid for everything. And I'm from a pretty poor family. We didn't have the resources to send me to college otherwise. And so I knew I had to get a scholarship. So I did my whole uh, school, all of my schooling, K through 12. I knew that if I wanted to go to college, I had to make that happen. And so that was my big goal. I wanted to be able to get out into the world, see the world for myself, and knew that I would have the opportunity to figure out things, right? Sort of after leaving home and going to school. So that was kind of a part of this journey too. It was like, okay, just do your best, get the best grades possible, participate in as many sports and academic activities as you can so that you can get a scholarship and you can figure it out, because I knew there wasn't any figuring it out in my home. Um, you know, the gender roles in our church are so strong. They are so present, ever present. Um, and there's not really a model for going against them or not falling in line with them. And I couldn't fall in line with them. It was just something I couldn't do. And so, everything in my life just kind of pointed to I was out of step with church, with school, and being a girl, like all of these things. Like I just was never good at being a girl. I failed at it entirely. Um, and really hated it. And so, but I knew that I couldn't talk about it because there would be consequences, right? There were enough consequences for not being good at being a girl. People asking why I didn't like wearing dresses, or, why I played so many sports, or, there was always kind of a hint at there's something wrong about this, that the way that you're living life. So I knew that I couldn't talk to anybody in my life about how I actually felt, because it was even more right than they were seeing. And so I knew I had to get to college. So I made my way there, had a full scholarship. I started school, and I'll never forget. It was at the beginning of my sophomore year. I saw National Coming Out Day, which I found out later what it was. There were a bunch of rainbows on Hayden Lawn at ASU. There were, students out on the lawn, and boys holding hands with boys and girls holding hands with girls. And I lived in the dorm that was right by Hayden Lawn, right in the center of campus. And I was walking back from class and just happened to see this. And once I figured out, I was like, wait, boys are holding hands with boys, girls are holding hands with girls. I was like, whoa, I was terrified. And I ran into my dorm room. I literally booked it because I wanted to know more. I was like, what is this? What is this group of people? This is also terrifying. So spent the day kind of peeking around corners from the periphery, watching, slowly sort of building up the courage to kind of walk by a few times with hundreds of other students, right? Um, but eventually, stopped, took a couple of flyers and that sort of stuff. And they had a political group. They had gosh, I forget what it was called. It was a play on ACT UP. I think it was ACT Out was the name of their student political group. And so I thought that would be a safe place to start. I'd been active in public service and, the idea of service my whole growing up. It's a core part of my family, a core part of our faith. I was a part of different uh, mechanisms for doing that as a part of student government and all of these different things. And so it felt like a natural fit. So I went to one of their meetings and, kind of stayed on the periphery for a little while, but sort of slowly started investigating these LGBTQ student clubs. Went to their coming out discussion group that was at the time facilitated by a therapist in sort of the um, student mental health section of the health center. Um, and one day there was a meeting at a coffee shop on Mill Avenue, and there was a guest speaker. And so I didn't know anything about the guest speaker and had just heard that there would be a guest speaker. I was like, okay, that sounds fun. So I went to this meeting and was standing outside with all these people, and everybody's kind of chatting. And then I remember this very tall woman walking up. And I'm really short, so like everybody's tall to me. I don't really think much of it. I just thought, oh, she's very tall, and she's kind of chatting with people, and I figure out that she's our guest speaker, and the other folks there are kind of a little acting a little strange. They're not quite as welcoming as I would, expect. And I was kind of like, huh, this is strange. I wonder what's going on here. But we go in, everybody's decides to go into the coffee shop. People are making their orders, and then we're going to sit on the patio and listen to the guest speaker. And I got to the door first and opened the door and just held it open for everybody that was standing outside. And our guest speaker, her name is Leia. She just stands there and kind of waits for me to go in, like she's accustomed to people not holding the door for her. And I was just standing there, and I just smiled at her, and we just kind of stared at each other for a few minutes. And I was like, well, you should go in. And she kind of teared up, and I didn't really understand what was happening. I was like, okay, interesting. But we all, order our drinks and go in and sit down on the patio, and she starts talking and she starts telling her story. And it turns out she's a trans woman. And this is the first trans person I've ever met. And as she's telling her story, I just remember like fireworks in my mind going off of like, oh my gosh, she's like me. Like, this is my story. Like, we are the same. There are other people like me. Number one, whoa, didn't know that. I thought maybe I was the only person that felt this way. Um, and there was a path for me, there was a path where I could actually become who I am and live my life in a way that felt real and authentic. I was overwhelmed by that discovery. Clearly, that was, kind of like coming up for breath after you've been underwater for a really long time, feeling that rush of oxygen, and like you were going to like, it just felt like for the first time I was going to have a future. I could never see my life as an adult. I had career aspirations and different things, but I couldn't see anything else. I couldn't really see who I would become and what my life would look like because I didn't want that life. I didn't want to grow up and be a woman and be all of those things because it's not who I was. It felt like a betrayal of myself to even, like, I couldn't even conceptualize it, to even try to conceptualize it. And so for the first time, I could see a path. And I remember going home to my dorm room and just, this was in the early days of Ethernet. So, very early days. I mean, we still had Netscape, I think, was the browser. It was a long time ago. And so I remember doing as best of, internet searches as I could, searching for transgender, transsexual, transvestite, right? Sort of all the different terms at the time, trying to figure out if there were more people like me, and discovering to my delight that there were, right? Discovering that there were lots of other trans people in the world, discovering that there were groups of trans people here in Arizona, that met, that talked. There were, therapists that saw us. I remember discovering the Benjamin Standards of Care, which were the guidelines for medical transition at the time, social and medical transition, and reading through those and being like, oh my gosh, there's a plan. Like, I can do this. Like, I could go to a doctor and say, this is who I am. Help me physically become who I actually am inside, in my heart and in my soul. And just the hope that I felt was overwhelming because honestly, I I don't even know if like despair is a strong enough word of how I felt when I would think about my future. Um, I didn't date in high school. I didn't date in as a kid. Like, I didn't do any of those things. I had no interest in any of that because not because I wasn't interested in other people, but because I didn't want to be what other people expected me to be in terms of my gender and my sex. And that felt like it just felt so wrong that I couldn't even begin to fathom, dating someone. So all of these things start opening up as I realize that I can transition. The optimism and excitement that I felt for my life finally um, was incredible. I mean, it just felt like everything opening up and all of the possibilities were actually in front of me. All the things that everybody else had felt for my life throughout my childhood, I finally felt because I knew that I could transition and then live my life the way I was supposed to, and in a way that felt good for me and real for me. And so then, once I discovered all of this and I was doing research and, finding all of these things out and, starting to research the process. Okay, I go to a therapist, I go and do, for these different, go through these different steps with the therapist, and then I see a doctor and I do these different steps and, kind of creating that pathway for myself. The thing that I had to do was come out. And that was really scary. Um, this was 1999. And so, um, I didn't know any trans people. Even in the LGBT student group, there were no trans people at all. It was gay and lesbian people with a few bisexual people. Um, so I was pretty afraid, other than the guest speaker. She was the one trans person I had met, and she, was not a part of the student group. She lived off campus and was living her life. Um, so I knew I had to come out, and that was terrifying. Um, I knew that my parents were going to have a hard time with it. I assumed that everybody would have a hard time with it, and I was really scared. But as I as I realized the life that I could lead if I came out and if I transitioned, there's just this like overwhelming sense of happiness and excitement that just filled me and felt like it was bubbling up where I couldn't contain it. I would try, but then I knew that if I didn't come out, if I didn't tell people, and if I didn't pursue becoming me, I wouldn't find happiness and no one would ever actually know me. And so I came out. I came out first to my best friend. She's still my best friend. She was amazing. Um, I don't know if I would have had the courage to come out to anybody else if she wouldn't have been so awesome and wonderful and loving. Um, she was there for me. Um, she told me she loved me no matter what, that she was in my life for the long run, and that was it. And this was okay. This was good. Um, that gave me a whole lot of courage, and yeah, I will owe her for the rest of my life, because she really, her giving me a hug and telling me that she loved me after I came out, that's what gave me the courage to then tell my mom, to tell my dad, to start coming out to everybody else. And I don't think anybody else responded quite as well as she did. She definitely responded with the most love and grace. Um, my mom gave me a big hug, told me she loved me, and also was really confused. She didn't understand transitioning. She was afraid, for my well being. Um, my dad uh, got angry. He was not excited about uh, my coming out, said that he would never, support me, would never accept this, would never call me by a different name. And it was a hard conversation. Told me I couldn't see my little brothers anymore, which I then didn't see them for about 10 years. Um, so it was hard. I lost a lot in the beginning, but I knew that this is who I am. Like that sense of coming up for breath after being underwater, that sense of overwhelming excitement and opportunity in front of me to live my life. That was something that I couldn't turn away from. I had literally never felt that before. And so I knew I had to follow this path, even if it cost me a lot. Um, Even when I came out to the LGBTQ student group as trans, a lot of people did not receive that well. They were
Mm.
not excited about having a trans person in their midst. And people tried to talk me out of being trans, said, well, you're just butch, you're just masculine, you're misunderstanding things. Why would you do that to your body? Kind of all the things you still hear today, honestly. Um, but again, I knew that I had to pursue this path because it's actually who I was. And so I did. I started to, I researched and started to go through, those steps. It was not easy. We had the coming out discussion group, which was great. Um, so that was exciting. And it was a free mental health resource that I was able to utilize because again, I was from a family that did not have a lot in terms of financial resources. When I came out, that became even less because you kind of lose your family support when you don't live the way they want you to live. And you decide to come out and pursue these things. When I decided to do that, my family was didn't really want to support that, and so that was tough. My mom tried for a long time. She eventually moved to West Virginia to take care of her mom after probably 2-ish years. Um, and then a lot of distance grew between us. Every time I would call, I was started hormones by this time, and every time I would call, my voice was changing a little bit. And she would always ask me at some point in the conversation, "Do you have a cold?" And I would say, "No, my voice is changing." And then we would hang up very quickly. She would get upset. Um, let's see. Uh, I'll back up a little bit. Before my sophomore year and before I saw the flags and such at National Coming Out Day, um, I had gone to Italy and had been living there, and we were in Rome one weekend and went to the Vatican. And I knew I was different. I knew there was something different about my life. Um, I still didn't know much about the world, saw a few things in Italy where it's like, oh, like, men holding hands or, different things like that, where it's like, huh, interested. What is this? But maybe it was just cultural, like there's lots of stuff going on that I just had no clue of at that age. But I knew I was different, and I knew that at some point I was going to have to make a choice to like figure it out or not. um, and it was just getting overwhelming, with how alone I felt and how unseen and unknown by anyone in my life I felt. Like I could tell there are a lot of people that felt close to me, but I didn't feel close to them because I couldn't let them know me. And I remember being at the Vatican and we're looking at the Pietà, we're walking around, we're doing all kinds of things. I'm with a small group of friends, and folks kind of go off and do their own thing. And I just decided to pray in this place, in this beautiful cathedral. And I just, I just didn't, again, I didn't see a path forward for my life yet. And I asked God if, I was like, is this what you want from me? Like, what do you want from me? I feel like I have to change my life in some significant way. And I've always felt like a boy. I've never felt like, you know, this like a girl, like everyone tells me I should feel. And I just remember, just asking God, like, please give me a sense of what you want me to do. Give me a sense of how you want me to leave this place because I'm feeling like I need to make some decisions and some choices. And it's getting weird that I don't want to date people and people are noticing and getting weirded out by it and, all these different things. And, other people can see a path for their adulthood in their life that I can't. And I don't understand why. And I just asked God, I was just like, I think I'm something that I'm not supposed to be, that other people don't want me to be, um, that my church doesn't want me to be, that my family doesn't want to be me to be. I think I am something that I don't even know what the language is for yet, but I think my life isn't what everyone wants it to be, and I want a pathway to find my actual, way forward. And the sense of like love that I felt from God in that moment of I made you to be exactly who you are, and this is the life that I want you. I want you to go and discover it. I want you to find a life that feels like it's yours. Like I was confident leaving that space that at some point in the near future, I was going to figure it out. I was like, okay, all right, God doesn't want me to be miserable. God doesn't want me to be sad and lonely and feel like no one knows me. Like God wants me to live as the person I actually am. And I still didn't have language for it, like still didn't really know what that meant, but very quickly uh, learned what that meant in the coming months. And I was really grateful for that, finding a pathway. And I think for me, that was also not only the beginning of my transition, but the first time that I felt like loved and truly guided by God was by saying to God, hey, I know I'm not this thing that everyone thinks I am and wants me to be. I'm this other scary thing. But I think you already know that. And so I need help here. Um, and it really felt, you know, I don't know, it just felt like I was being guided and led. So, I start coming out. I came out to everybody. I start going through the process. Again, the process was different then. You had to go to therapy and start dressing differently, and live as the gender that you were um, and sex that you were going to transition to. And so, I start going through all of those processes, eventually start hormones, which was hard to do and expensive and a little off and on because I didn't have health insurance at the time and didn't have much money. And so, I was trying to figure this out as a young adult. Um, and so I, sort of entered this second puberty where a lot of people, would ask me constantly, "Are you a boy or a girl?" Little kids ask me that all the time, which it didn't bother me because they're just curious. They didn't ask with judgment. Adults asked with judgment. um, it uh, it made my life a little scary sometimes. I remember one time I was traveling on spring break, and I was traveling by bus, and just got a lot of looks, got a lot of sort of nasty looks, a lot of grumbling behind my back, um, you know, a lot of sort of scary things. I tried to travel. I was traveling home by bus while when I was traveling. I was trying to go to Iowa. I was traveling there by plane and got stuck in a storm, and ended up in Memphis. And it was overnight. There was a big storm in Iowa. I wasn't going anywhere. And I remember at one point, there are very few people in the airport. It's me and, a couple of other folks, a couple dozen people in this big airport. And somebody started, a janitor or someone on the cleaning staff started yelling, kind of nasty things at me. It started with, "Are you a boy or a girl?" in a really hostile way and kind of escalated from there. And I didn't have a cell phone. This was still a long time ago. So I got on a payphone. I hadn't talked to my dad in a very long time, in probably years at this point, at least 2.5 years. But I called him and he answered the phone. I said, "Hey, just stay on the phone with me for a few minutes. I need to look busy. How are you doing?" And just tried to like transition into a quick conversation. My hope was that if I was on the phone, this guy would walk away and leave me alone. And my dad kind of starts talking, but he can hear this guy in the background. And, he's trying to have a conversation with me, but I can tell he's getting upset. And at one point he says, "Hold on, here, take it, talk to your stepmother." And he hands the phone off to my stepmother, Kathy. And I was just like, great, he can't even talk to me on the phone. Like I was pretty upset. It was not a good situation all the way around. I figured my voice, changing was upsetting him or something. And my stepmother and I start talking, and then I hear the door closing loudly. And I was like, what was that? Is he that upset that he left the house? And I asked her that, and she said, no, he's coming to get you. And I was like, what? And I was like, I didn't ask him to do that, and she was like, well, he's on his way. And I was like, well, stop him. She was like, I can't, he's gone already. My dad heard this guy and literally got in the car from St. Louis and drove to Memphis in the airport, picked me up. And then he drove me to Iowa, where I was going, and immediately left. We barely talked the entire time, but it was probably like midnight when I called him, or 11. It was the middle of the night. He got in his car, came and picked me up, and I asked him why, and he, as we were getting close to Iowa, where I was going, and he was like, "Well, I heard somebody in the background saying awful things to you, and I thought I needed to come and get you." So, yeah. And I had several kind of interactions like that throughout those 10 years. Um, when his brother passed away, his youngest brother died. His middle brother ended up trying to start a fight with me because he didn't like that I was dressed in a suit and was calling me names. My dad had to intervene. So he saw these little sort of glimpses of my life where things weren't very easy for me. Um, and over time, it was those moments that changed things for him. He realized that uh, I wasn't transitioning for fun, that this wasn't an easy path, um, and that it must be really important to me in order to put myself through that honestly, and to take on those additional challenges in life. Um, when I was 29, so I was almost 30, um, he had a high school reunion here in Arizona, and he came out to go to that high school reunion, and he called me and asked me if I would pick him up and from the airport, and we'd probably only seen each other like 3 times in those 10 years, maybe. Um, and for very brief amounts of time, none of them had gone particularly well. One of them was the funeral for his younger brother, and I said yes. And so I picked him up from the airport and drove him to Coolidge, where he had grown up, and dropped him off, for his reunion. And he asked me if I would pick him back up when, the reunion weekend was over. And I said, sure. And I figured I'd just be taking him back to the airport. But when I picked him up, he asked if he could, stay over for one night, and because his flight was the next day. And I was like, oh, yeah, sure, I guess. I was like, that's fine. And I also was like, I can come back and pick you up tomorrow. And he was like, no, I want to see your life, And I was like, okay. So he spent the night at my house for one night. We went to dinner, had some conversations. His flight wasn't until like midday the next day. And so he wanted to go to work with me the next day and like meet my coworkers and such, and, just kind of see my life a little bit. And I remember when I dropped him off at the airport, and I didn't think anything had changed because, he wasn't acting really any differently. And that night I got an email from him where he apologized. Um, and he apologized for not being there for me and not being a part of my life. And he said he wanted it to be different. So, so we started talking slowly but surely. Um, he started learning about trans people and the LGBTQ community. Mhm. And one of the things he asked if we could read the Book of Mormon together because he wanted my perspective. But this time when he asked, he didn't ask to change me. I could tell. Like he really just wanted like some way to bond together. And so we read the Book of Mormon together and just tried to learn together. Like he wasn't asking me to read it so that I would come to a different way of living. I could tell that he was actually listening to me and my experiences and my thoughts on it. Um, and he was doing the work on his own to learn about trans people and LGBTQ people. And I could see him changing, I could see his perspective changing. I could see just the way that he talked to me was differently. Um, that he used my name, that he called me his son, right? That he used he and him pronouns. Like he just, I don't know, his whole heart changed, he just entirely changed. Um, and I just became his son and got to be a part of his life and got to be a part of my brother's lives again. And he felt I could tell he felt pained for not seeing me as who I am sooner, for not letting me just be his son sooner. And that was, it was a lot. We worked through a lot. We were able to work through a lot of hard things together before he passed away. He died at the beginning of the pandemic, a couple months in. So I'm glad that we were able to find each other and to create a relationship, where he actually got to know me, where I got to know him. Um, we got to apologize to each other for different hurts that we caused, and I just got to be his son. That was special. I feel really blessed that I got to have that. Um, my mom and I had a similar journey, where she really struggled at first. Um, my mom differently though. She is disabled. She has some health conditions where eventually she needed someplace to live. And so she ended up asking to move in with me. This was, I think, probably about a year after my dad and I reconciled. Um, and I knew she didn't have anywhere else to go. And so I said yes. And I said, my only condition is that you use the right name and pronouns in my own home. And if you can't, like, let's just not talk. And so she moved in with me. It was a very rough first year, honestly, very rocky. But everything changed for her when I had top surgery. She got to take care of me. And I think she saw me wake up from surgery with the biggest smile on my face that she had ever seen. And she got to see me feel comfortable in my body for the first time ever. Um, I found later this little chart, this handwritten chart she had kept, because you have to track the fluid, the amount of fluid that's coming out of your body through these drains, the color, all of these different things. And she had to change those. And she wrote all these cute little notes like, he's feeling so much better today, like just really sweet little things. Um, and it was like a flip switched for her when she saw how happy I was. Um, After that, after she got to care for me as her son, she never went back. Like she has, from that day forward, I've just been her son. Even when she talks about my childhood, like she doesn't mess up. She doesn't even think of me in any way differently than her son at this point. And so she's lived with me for a long time now. But we were able to find peace and a relationship where you know I got to be her son, and we got to know each other, to really know each other, right? To actually know who each other are, which I got that with both of my parents, and that feels really special. I feel lucky to have had that, and I have that with the world too, because I get to live my life, as the person that I am. I get to be Michael. I get to do the work that I do, advocating for myself and other LGBTQ people and other trans people. And in this time in particular, that feels more important than ever, honestly, especially as, uh, the world is an increasingly hostile place, unfortunately, for LGBTQ people. So I feel blessed to get to do that work. And I hope that just listening to me and hearing my story and hearing the story of other trans people helps people see that we're not different. We're just people trying to find our way and our path forward and trying to find our own purpose in life, just like everybody else. It looks different for different trans people. Some of us have families and have children. Some of us have, take care of our elder parents. Some of us are focused on careers. Um, the same for cisgender people. We all follow different paths that work for our lives. And hopefully at the end of the day, we contribute something to this big, beautiful world and help make it a better place. But yeah, I I feel really blessed to live in the time that I live in, to have been able to transition. It was the best possible thing that could have happened in my life. And yeah, I feel very lucky to get to live the life that I live.
Well, Michael, I've heard a little bit of your story over time, but there's something about just hearing this for more of it in one session that's so deeply moving. You brought me to tears a couple times. I bet
Well,
our guests feel the same way. And maybe this is the first time a guest has listened to a transgender person. And I continue to learn and grow in this space. Uh, Here's some things I wrote down, listeners. I first want to talk about, my wife and I went to um, the road to Jericho. We looked over that road going from Jerusalem to Jericho and relived the parable of the Good Samaritan. And as our teacher, Emily Bell Freeman, coincidentally, before she was called as the Young Women's General President, was our teacher, and she didn't talk about transgender people in that, but I thought about that because the parable talks about superior moral behavior from a group that was seen as the worst. And Christ was asked the question, who is our neighbor? And the audience was Jewish people, and the Jewish people despised Samaritans. And I don't know the background for that. And there was a Jewish person needing help on the road to Jericho, and the Jewish leader passed by, another person passed by, but the Samaritan did not pass by. And the Samaritan took this Jewish person, cared for him, took him to safety, paid for his housing, offered to pay more money. And it was really probably, if I were a Jewish person sitting here and listening to that, I'd probably be pretty uncomfortable. But Christ wanted us to be uncomfortable sometimes so we could grow in our discipleship to love all of his children. And as Sister Freeman was talking about that parable, I thought of my transgender friends who often show superior moral behavior and take the high ground and do so much in our world. And I think of you, Michael, as a perfect example of that. You're not perfect,
very kind.
but you have lived a really difficult road with integrity. And for the last 20 years, that could be a whole different podcast, what you've done in this society to help make society a better place for everybody. Your whole life is focused on helping other people. And so I'm grateful for that parable, and I'm grateful for a real life modern day example in Michael Soto of the Good Samaritan rescuing people and modeling discipleship and helping us think who is our neighbor. Our trans friends are our neighbor. That is the doctrinal theology of being a Christian. The next thing I thought about, just your own coming out story. There were so many little tender things. This guest speaker, you remember her name after all these years,
Yeah.
Leah.
Never forget.
You held the door for her, and you didn't say this, but I think what you were saying is you were acknowledging her as a woman by holding the door, and
Yeah.
that made her feel good, and she passed. And I just thought the little beautiful part of that. Then I loved how, and some would say, well, I hope people don't say this, that you're just confused because you got to be around Leah and went to Netscape. I actually remember Netscape and Ethernet and all that stuff. And you just read stories of transgender people and it confused you. You're not confused, Michael.
No.
And then these beautiful things that you said, there's a path for me,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
the path gives me hope. And I'm so glad you found um, your story as somebody dealing with significant gender dysphoria, no language for that, no understanding, but real clear long term. I'm a boy. And then you found this beautiful thing. There's a path for me and giving hope. Hope is my favorite word in the whole human vocabulary, listeners. And when we can find that within ourselves, or in that rare time we can actually give it to somebody else, and maybe that's partly what the Samaritan did to the Jew that was just about at death's door on the road to Jericho. And then you
Love that.
said, "There's a plan for me."
Mhm.
And this is how I navigate gender dysphoria. And there's actually a plan. It's actually in the medical literature. You mentioned it.
Yep.
Do you want to talk more? I've got some more
Yeah.
things to share, but I don't know if you just want to comment on any of those first two things I've shared, your own story and the parable.
I love the parable. I feel like so many people have been a Samaritan to me and helped me throughout my life. There so many people have stopped and held me when I was unable to move forward. Like my best friend, I would
Mm.
never have had the courage to really pursue, life, the life that I lead today, without her unconditional love and support. Um, the I have a plan part, that really resonates with me because knowing that there was a medical path for me and a social path, like that gave me so much hope. But I also felt like it was an answer to my prayer in Rome, right? It felt like God telling me that he has a plan for me and that this was the plan, right? He intended me to be on this earth and be a transgender person and to walk that path for whatever reason. I believe with every ounce of my being that that is true. And every day that feels more true and more right and more purposeful for me. And, I don't know why that's my path in life, but I thank God for it. And I feel really lucky to get to live this life and have this beautiful human experience of being Michael, being a trans man. And it has brought me to some very scary and lonely places, but also to the most beautiful, loving places. I have a life that is filled with people that are so loving and kind and teach me to be a better person every day. And so I hope that I show up in that same way, helping our community, helping human beings see each other more fully and love each other as neighbors. Ultimately, I think that's why we're all here.
I love that you involve God. And I recognize the church didn't have answers for you, and some of the answers they had were not helpful, and you had to navigate institutions around you that were not helpful for you. And I just acknowledge that. But you went to God, and that's a really good consistent theme on this podcast for my LGBTQ guests is a lot of them have to turn to God because there's just not answers. And they get
Yep.
answers, and I believe in that beautiful theology that God loves all of his children
Yeah.
and that
Me too.
God will guide you and help you. I wrote down the next thing I wrote down is a good tree brings forth good fruit. One of the earliest lessons I learned as a young Mormon youth was this idea of a bad tree brings forth bad fruit and a good tree brings forth good fruit. And that's how we could judge sort of the tree. And to me, that represents you and the path that you've chosen and your God given personal revelation that transitioning was the right thing for you. And even though I shouldn't be judging your path, if we do, the way we look at that is so what is the fruit of 20 years you've been on this road? You're one of the guests that's probably been on this road the longest as I'm thinking back of our trans guests. And I, I just see good fruit. Your personal love of yourself, your kind spirit, your bridge building, every time I hear you speak, it's like this pastoral, kind, thoughtful, bridge building, non bombastic, just this soft, kind, mature soul that is a bridge builder. And I've just thought that's a gift of the Spirit.
Thank
And
you
it
so
may not have
much.
been, I don't think it would have been possible because you've been dealing with this gender dysphoria. And
Yeah.
then you've look at your academic career. You got a scholarship to get into ASU. You're on a PhD right now. You're serving the people in the community as president and CEO of Equality Arizona. You're a bridge builder to the LDS Church and to many communities. And so I just look, and that's just a little bit that I'm aware of. I'm assuming your personal friends could come on the podcast, your coworkers, and say, but it's just back to this, good tree brings forth good fruit. And every decision you've made in your life has not only blessed you, but it's blessed other people. And I want to get out of judgment a little bit, but I do go down that road and say, boy, what you've done is just remarkable. And who am I to sit on the sidelines and say you shouldn't have transitioned, or Satan's confusing you, or some of the stories that I used to put in my head to sort of keep everything in a nice, tidy box for me.
Yeah.
Um, the next thing I wrote down some things that when I talk about this subject a little bit, the first story I heard, listeners, was a mom talking about her son who had long-term gender dysphoria, which I don't understand or feel, but she talked about car sick, and she talked about the awful nauseating feeling that her son feels, and he wants to do anything to get out of the car. And we've all experienced being car sick, and we can sort of stop the car, get out of the car. That's never been a multiple year event to feel car sick. But for people with long term gender dysphoria, I don't know how that relates to you. I could get car sickness, Michael, so it was really helpful for
Yeah.
me. I don't know
No,
if
that's a great
I
analogy.
don't know if
I love
if
that.
you like that analogy or not.
I do. I really like that. It feels, that feeling of car sickness or seasickness, it's like it's overwhelming. It overwhelms your senses, and you want to do anything to make it stop, to get out of the car, to make everything stand still. Um, yeah, I can really relate to that. That's a great analogy for what it feels like of just being trapped in something that you have no control over, and it feels so awful.
So, and imagine explaining car sickness to people 4 centuries ago before there were cars.
Oh,
Maybe
yeah.
seasickness they could get. So we were on
Yeah,
boats a lot earlier before we were in cars. So maybe
we were.
we could relate to seasick, but that's maybe what it's like for Michael to explain his experience for us in the 16th century before we had cars. The other
Yeah.
story I like to tell is Catherine Schweitzer, who in 1964, as a woman, this isn't a trans story, but she ran the Boston Marathon, and
Yeah.
she could not sign up as a woman. The assumption was in 1964 that women were too frail to run marathons. So there's a picture of her that's the race officials running to take her number off.
Yep.
And we all cringe when we hear that. And what's changed is, well, these narrow gender roles for women, this scales a little bit into this story. We had boxed women up into this world where we thought they couldn't run marathons. And what's changed is the science has helped us to understand women are not too frail. And maybe
Right.
more importantly, we all of you listeners know a woman that's run a marathon, or you have run a marathon. And that's back to this word proximity that is so important. And I call it the trap of unearned opinions. It's easy for me to form opinions about trans people by watching to cable news or
Mhm.
social media. It takes more maturity to say, I'm not going to engage in that content. I'm going to go talk to people like Michael Soto. I'm going to talk to multiple trans people before I form any opinions about trans people. And I'm going to follow the example Christ did in his ministry to do that. Any comments on
Love
that
that.
section?
I think that's so important, Richard, just that proximity piece. Like let's stop believing stories about different kinds of people written by people by, you know, by not that community, right? Let's stop believing rumors and stereotypes. And the most important thing that you can do, whether it's a trans person or an immigrant or somebody else, that uh, you don't live like them, is to go and make a friend, right? Go and get to know people, hear our stories, learn from each other, and form a relationship. It's a very different thing to know. I don't know, to know a story about someone, and to know a person, right? Or to know a narrative about a people, a whole group of people. And then to get to know individuals that are a part of that group, it's going to open your eyes. And hopefully, you'll see that trans people, intersex people, LGBT people, we're just human beings. And we've always been here. We're not a threat to anybody. We just, you know, want to do the best that we can with our lives, and the same that everybody else wants.
These two stories of your parents are some of the best stories of proximity I've ever heard. Um,
Yeah.
and just this is maybe one of the gifts of your space is you've been in the space for 20 years and you've had these parents that have had to kind of work through some time.
Yeah.
I will never forget the story of you calling your dad from the St. Louis airport, if I've got my facts right. No, he's in
Memphis
St.
Airport.
Louis. You're in
Yeah.
Memphis.
Yeah.
That might be a Northwest flight before when they had a hub there back in the day.
Yeah.
I
It probably
remember
was.
I remember using Memphis back in my early travel. Anyway, and he and and you called him, which took a little bit of courage.
Yeah.
But then he did the very best he could. And it shocked you. He left St. Louis, picked you up in Memphis, and drove you to Iowa. But said he barely talked. And I
Yeah.
thought, maybe, and you're giving grace to your parents, maybe he could get his arms around, I can protect you. I
Yeah.
just can't quite talk about it, but I know you need protection, and I'm a dad, and I can do that. And he drove all night, and it's this beautiful. And then, then he comes to his high school reunion, um, and he wants to be a part of your life. I think he really wants to be a part of your life, and you both want that to happen. And then he stays with you, and he wants to come to work, and he's just kind of. And then you talk about, after he sent this email and apologized, that he did the work to really understand you,
Yeah.
and then he's passed away, and this is just. I have to think he's on the other side, grateful that he did what he did.
Yeah.
And that it brings him a measure of peace. Our dog is yapping in the background, listeners. Sorry about that. And that you obviously have peace because you reconciled with your father. And I'm sorry he's gone, but
Too.
that story of one of our other guests have talked about the reconciliation of LGBTQ Latter-day Saints, and that's just a beautiful story of reconciliation with a family. And then your mom, you took care of her, but it's just interesting. What was the most important thing for her and changed her heart the most was actually taking care of you after top surgery, which at one point was probably the last thing she ever wanted to have you do.
Yeah.
And here she is caring for you after top surgery, and then using your pronouns. He is feeling so much better today.
Yeah.
That's just the beauty of taking care for somebody and seeing that. And back to Brene Brown's quote, the importance of proximity and being right there. Any more comments on your dad and your mom as
Well,
you're thinking
my mom
about
and my
that?
dad, they are the reason why I'm a bridge builder. They taught me how to do that. It was that path of reconciliation with both of them that taught me that how you find a way forward with people is not by them leaving your life, but is by bringing them in closer. My dad, he found, when I came out, both of them didn't know how to parent a trans person. They didn't even know what transgender meant, right? So of course they had no conceptualization of what it would mean to be a mom or a dad to a trans person. But as we had these moments of proximity throughout that, sort of decade of not being very close to each other, my dad had these moments where he got to be a dad. He got to protect me, right? He got to step in and be a part of my life in that way. And that was very meaningful to him. And he got to, we got, to see each other as son and father and find a way forward together. Um, my mom, same thing. She is a caregiver more than any other person I've ever met. And so, I think ultimately when I was transitioning, she felt, I don't know, she couldn't find a way to care for me, right, as her son until she had that opportunity to actually physically take care of me. And that, for her, provided an opening for her to be a part of my life and to understand me as her son, and so it was through these very I guess very gendered roles for both my father as a protector and my mother as a caregiver. But in both ways, they're giving care to me, right? They're taking care of me as their son and found a role in my life. Um, and we were able to find a way forward that wasn't about judgment, that wasn't about, keeping someone at a safe distance, but was about inviting somebody into maybe the most vulnerable parts of your life, whether that's medical care or places where you feel unsafe. And we got to find each other again, and I feel so grateful for that. And my other brothers did not get a chance to reconcile with my father before he passed away. Uh, I do have hope that my brother Josh, who passed away this spring, is with our dad. That now that they've had that chance to reconcile, I hope. Um, but yeah, I feel fortunate that I've had that in my life. Oh, Richard, I can't hear you. Sorry.
Oh, these are two beautiful stories of your mom and your dad reconciling and with you.
Thank you.
And it's just an invitation for all of us that reconciliation is possible and and what's possible, whatever reason we are unreconciled to somebody. I thought of Greg Prince, who's been on this podcast
Mm,
before. He's older than me. I'm 65, and he has another 15 years, I think, roughly, of experience in this space. And one of the things he talks about is just, the fear mongering and the wedge issues that have been part of the political narrative that you're in the middle of in Arizona. And he
yeah,
talks about, in some ways it was gay men and gay women, particularly gay men. And there's been some obviously improvement of that, but it's trans people now, as you well know. And
yeah,
it seems like we take on the most vulnerable group with the smallest representation. And I love his word, fear mongering, wedge issues. And I just invite us to not buy into that. My whole lifetime, we've been creating fear mongering and wedge issues around marginalized groups of people. That
yep,
at the end of the day, it doesn't, it just hasn't held water.
yeah,
And I repent for some of my involvement in that stuff in the past. And I want to do the scriptures you were talking about, perfect love casteth out fear. I think of the perfect love your parents shared with you in a couple of those home run experiences. Your dad getting in the car and going from St. Louis to Memphis to Iowa, and
yep,
just his willingness to just do the work is just perfect love. And then
yep,
your mother taking care of you after top surgery and writing, he is feeling better today on her little notes, and you have those notes.
you,
That is just perfect love
yeah, yeah,
casteth out fear. And your parents have no fear of you. And people that know Michael Soto have no fear of Michael. And I hope you certainly feel that as you listen to this good man. I think for you parents that are going through, raising a trans kid, I think Michael would obviously talk about the grief you'll go through. You can, and you may need to go to a therapist because you're losing a son
yep,
or daughter. You're
yep,
losing a name that you gave somebody, and Michael's nodding his head, and so it's not like you are not supposed to process your own grief,
right,
but you can kind of do those concurrently, where you can learn to, and maybe a therapist, you go through this grief and anger and acceptance and you recycle those, and you're trying at the same time to support your trans kiddo. And so I'm not a therapist, but I certainly aware of the grief you may feel as a parent. And Michael and I are not inviting you not to feel those feelings. That's a human emotion.
Yes.
And if you've got time, I'm keeping you over time. Do you have any thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, I do actually. I think it's super important for parents to feel those emotions. That's normal and natural. And I realized that my parents had to go through a grieving process, but that's what allowed them to come to accept me and love me as who I am, is that they had to go through a process of their own, a transition of their own, if you will. We all transitioned when I transitioned my gender. And so that's a process. It takes time and it takes love and understanding. And I would say to the trans kids out there, the trans young people, the trans young adults, um, remember to love your parents through this too. They're doing the best they can. And the more that you all love each other and have that desire to love each other without judgment, without fear, to love each other more perfectly, that's what's going to get you through this, is not keeping a scorecard of every time somebody messes up, right? Every time somebody's using a wrong pronoun or grieving, a name being changed, any of that. That's all normal and natural. Um, but instead being there for each other and loving each other through those hard moments, talking through those hard moments, being honest with each other. For parents, definitely see a therapist, find a parent support group. There are a lot of amazing support groups for the parents of trans kids that are still children and trans kids that are adults. So you can find, other parents going through this with you that will support you, and parents that have gone through it already that will be there to support you. And so there's a big community that wants to welcome you and love you and help you and your family through this. And um, there's a lot of light at the end of the tunnel. If you keep walking the journey, you all are going to find, I hope that you will find a better, more authentic and real and loving relationship as a family, um, as you walk through this process together, because you'll get to know each other better.
You're answering good questions. The question that popped in my mind that maybe a listener wants you to answer is,
Yeah.
what would you say, Michael? I'm a parent. I've got a kid that feeling transgender. I'm really trying to be supportive. I'm listening to your story. I'm recognizing that for you this has been the right path, but I'm really nervous. This might be a phase. I'm worried that this may be, if we go too quick and we do some of the medical stuff, that this is something that will pass. If I kind of want to do the right thing here. I'm not just keep putting my head in the sand, but
Yeah,
also don't
yeah,
want to go too fast. And I wonder if
totally.
I really have a cis kid that's going through a phase.
So I always tell people there's no one way to transition, right? There's no one way to be trans. And so I think it's really important to listen to your child, to make sure that they have a great therapist, get them some great support in terms of therapy, um, and make sure to explore what it actually looks like to transition. So this is something that I'm saying to parents and to trans kids and young adults. Um, we have social media today that has lots of opinions and thoughts, not all of which are accurate. And so do the work of working with medical professionals to actually lay out the path in front of you. What is transition exactly? What are the options in front of you for medical transition, social transition, legal transition? Spell it all out and see what's in front of you. And then before you do any of those things, maybe the social transition, that's wearing different clothes, using a different name, that kind of stuff. That's none of that's, that's all pretty simple, and easy to do quickly, and easy for people to change if they want to be called a different name later. Um, but before you do the legal stuff, the medical stuff, I think it's really important for the trans person, the trans child or adult, to be able to answer a really important question. And somebody asked me this very early in my transition, and I am grateful every day that they asked me this. And they said, "What do you want your life to have looked like at the end of your life?" And before transition, like I was talking about, I couldn't see a path forward. I couldn't see my adulthood. So I had no idea how to answer that question and hadn't considered, when I'm 95, 99, whatever, ever old I live, hopefully a long time. And I look back at my life, who do I want to have been, right? What kind of man did I want to be? Um, if you can't answer that question, then I think you're not ready to transition yet. I think you need to be able to have some idea, maybe not answer every detail. That'll certainly grow and change and evolve as you grow and change and evolve. But you need to be able to have some sense of who you want to be, the life that you want to have lived at the end of your life, to be able to know what path is right for you in terms of transitioning. And there are lots of different options in terms of medical procedures, all sorts of different things, and not all of them are right for everybody. And so I think give yourself the gift of time, both the parent and the child. Explore all of those options, make a plan together. Just like any big life choice, this is something that as adults, we can help young people by helping them think through it and take the time to process each step and really create a plan that works for them and will hopefully help them at the end of their lives look back and said, I led the life that I truly wanted to live, that I believe was right for me. Because that's what I want for everybody when we are getting ready to leave this life and go to the next, to say, I did everything that was right for me and I lived the life that I wanted to live, that felt right and that helped me feel fulfilled and purposeful. So if you can answer those questions, I think you're ready. Until then, keep planning, keep researching, and keep working together to find a way forward.
What a thoughtful answer.
Oh,
I, I wrote down a couple other things that cis people often do gender affirming care. I've kind of joked about that as I see billboards around, and um, you know, that straight or cis people, men and women, do things at times to just
yeah.
help them feel better in their bodies. They don't call it gender
Yeah.
affirming care, but
Yeah.
I sort of do now in my mind, where I see I'm 65 and have a good head of hair.
Yeah.
But if
I'm
I had
jealous.
maybe had,
Mine's thinning.
yeah, who knows if I would have gone to Turkey. Some of my friends are going to Turkey and Georgia
Yeah.
and getting hair transplants, and they look pretty good. And I thought, would I
Yeah.
do that?
Yep.
And so I just think we give permission. I think I love the principle of self determination. It's my job to
Yeah.
support people as they self determine. So if a cis
Yes.
person does something that helps them feel better about their body, even though it's something I wouldn't do, I think I just
Yeah.
give them grace that that's their journey. I'm going to support them. I'm going to
Yep.
love them, and it makes them feel better. And I'm not in charge of
Exactly.
anybody's, decisions. I'm just in charge of trying to love and support them. I also
100%.
recognize in our church, we don't have a place for trans people. I wouldn't want to sugarcoat that
Yeah.
and say, we
Yeah.
do say all's welcome and we say we love everybody, but in August of 2025, we came out with increased restrictions in the LDS church for trans people. You would have to go to the bathroom of your biological sex in a church building or be escorted.
Yeah.
And I'm speaking for you, Michael, and my friends, it makes you feel like you're a threat or a second class citizen. And it's just deeply dehumanizing for my trans friends. And a lot of my trans friends in the church that were trying to make the church work left the church when that happened. And I grieve for that. And I acknowledge that they didn't feel safe or wanted, even though we say this broad statement, all are welcome. That's been a really difficult thing for trans people and their families and their allies to really see at the local level. Even sometimes there's a ward that really wants to welcome people and welcome you to priesthood meeting, for example, even though
Right.
the handbook would say you'd have to go to Relief Society. Sometimes the ward would get that and say, "What, you're welcome in priesthood, Michael."
Right.
But then
Yeah.
even that option was taken off the table for a local leader to do something like that because there was just real concrete rules at the local level. And so
Yeah.
I just grieve for that, and I acknowledge the pain of that. And I wish that didn't happen. And it's caused me a lot of personal grief because people I love and I think it also gives permission for people to then further target trans people when there's a policy statement. It's a message about how the church feels about trans people that gives people permission to sort of do not kind things. You're nodding your
Yeah,
head.
I think
So
you're right.
I don't know if you got any comments on that or any just last comments. I've got all my little notes have been taken care of and the things I want to share, but you could comment anything I said or anything you want to say or both.
Yeah, I mean, the church's policy in 2025, that was very hard personally. It was hard for our community. Um, that it hurts anytime a group of people that you love and care about say that you can't be trusted, right? That you aren't worthy of being treated with respect, just like everyone else. And, that was very, very hard and makes it impossible, really, for trans people to participate in the church. Because it's something as simple as using a restroom, right? I mean, I don't know a single woman that wants to use a public restroom with me. I think me walking into a women's room would make women deeply uncomfortable, rightfully so, and would probably cause the police to be called on me, as it should be. So, um, it actually creates a much more disruptive environment for this new policy that makes everybody less safe, trans people and everyone else, right? For that reason. I mean, just think of the kerfuffle if, I'm at a general conference or at a ward or anywhere with the church and try to use a women's room. That's not going to go over well. Um, so, I think a lot of trans people, as much as it's hurt, I think, you know, for me, I try to remember that this happens with human beings. Yeah, we have different points in society when different groups have been not allowed to participate, have not been integrated into society or have been segregated in ways that feel bad. And today we look back on that and say, oh, that was a mistake, right? We shouldn't have had white and colored bathrooms in this country. That was wrong. Um, I think the same is true for this. We'll look back at some point and be like, oh, wait, trans people weren't scary or trying to hurt anybody. Those were all not, those were all lies that we were told. Trans people just wanted to use the restroom and get out of there, just like everybody else. Um, so I have faith that someday we'll fix it. I hope that, as a society at large, we do. And I hope that institutions and organizations like the church do too, and find a way to see us as the loving neighbors and human beings that we are, and, find a way to love us like God loves us, like God loves all of us. He has I've been asked by several church leaders, kind of about my journey and about my story. And I always make sure to tell them that, this, I know without a shadow of a doubt that this is my purpose for being in this life, that God put me here to be exactly who I am. And I say that on purpose to church leaders. I'm not an accident. Like, there's nothing wrong with me. Like, this is the human being, the man that God intended me to be, and this is the route that he wanted me to get to being the man that I am. There's something in it for us to learn as human beings. And I hope that my life and sharing my life with people, as many people as I can, sharing my life with the church, right? Sharing my without fear, right? Inviting people into that story in my life helps us get closer to God's hope for all of us. And that's to love each other and to live well together.
You're a bridge builder. You've got a great heart. And
Thank you, my friend.
I echo your personal feelings that I have. My feeling is you're exactly where God wants you to be. And at great personal cost to you, but you're the wounded. We use this quote a lot on the podcast. A minister's service will not be perceived as authentic unless it comes from heart wounded about. And the great illusion of leadership is to think others can be led of a desert by someone who's never been there. That's a Henry Warren. So you are a wounded healer because of your own personal journey and the woundedness of being trans, but your ability and your to help other people because of that, because you can authentically talk about the pain and the difficulty and give hope to others because you've had to find hope in your own story. And then you have this incredible grace to be a bridge builder with institutions that don't have a place for you and have said really unkind things. And I love that you have this. I have the same feeling too. This is exactly where God wants you. And I wonder in our beautiful theology listeners that this pre earth life, that we were all there and voted for the same plan. Michael, you, me, we all voted for that
Yeah,
same plan.
we
I've
did.
always wondered if we kind of are presented options up there of the different
Mm,
avenues we'd want to take. And there's a
maybe.
phrase, the road less traveled is a book or a phrase. And I've wondered sometimes, I don't know this, but I'm open to the idea that some of our LGBTQ friends have felt impressed to take the road less traveled.
Yeah.
And God maybe gave them a few different ideas on what they could do in earth life. And they chose this path because they knew at the end of the day they could do the most good
Mm,
for other people, even though it came at great personal cost and great judgment on their core character. So
mm,
I'm not saying that's exactly our doctrine, but I'm open to them in our beautiful theology that's a possibility for all of us. And
yeah.
that somebody like Michael at this time with all this tension and maybe he's one of these really mature spirits I looked up to in the pre-earth life, that somebody, even though he's younger than me biologically, somebody I looked up to in the pre-earth life and was a great leader and a great moral guide for me. It's just a possibility that I think of, and that Michael now is doing really remarkable work because of the work he did in the pre-earth life to have this mature old soul that can be in this space-filled tension. I don't know if that's okay, Michael,
Very
but
kind.
I think about this kind of stuff sometimes.
You're very kind, my friend. The only reason I can do this kind of work is because you're doing what you do, and so many people are doing this work to create a world where and space where we can authentically be who we are, where we can show up and love each other and teach each other.
It's great. Well, we'll link to some stuff in the show notes, so you can learn more about Michael or learn about, um, what he's doing as the president CEO of Equality Arizona. You could get involved in that if you're in Arizona. I'm sure you'd
Mhm.
appreciate your help. If you'd like to
Absolutely.
get involved in the things they're taking on, and just any way you feel impressed to support Michael and support our trans people. Most of what we all do as allies is probably just in our circle of influence. Most of you won't start a podcast or write a book, or lead an organization like Michael, but this is more for allies. Just do what you can do in your circle of influence. That may be in your family, your ward, your book club, whatever circles you have, just at times to, do what allies do and take a few stones for our LGBTQ friends. But anyway, we need to sign off. This is Michael Soto and Richard Osler on another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love. And please share this with others so people's hearts can change.